This is going to cover calculator functions for chapter 3 of statistics. And so it's basically mean, median, variance, and standard deviation. And they all show up using the same function. So they're in two different sections, 3.1 and 3.2. But I'm going to lump them all together here because you calculate them all the same way. So with many of the functions, we're going to start by hitting the stats button and then edit, and that takes you to the list of the numbers that you're going to input. If you already have numbers in there, arrow up to the heading and then hit clear and enter, and then the same for any others that you have. And that will give you empty starting points for your lists. For this one, this is asking for the sample variance and standard deviation because it's from section 3.2, but I'm going to show you how to find the mean and median using the same functions. So I'm going to go ahead and enter the numbers in, and so to do that you just type in the number and hit enter and it'll populate them for you. So 16, 31, 22, 19, and 10 in this case. So then once you have your numbers in there, you're going to hit stat again. This time you're going to arrow over to calc, and what we want is one var stats. And so since that's already highlighted, hit enter. Your list is L1. In this case, we don't have anything in L2, so we want to make sure that is empty. Calculate. And so top one, X bar, is going to be the mean. And then we've got SX and sigma X, so that depends on whether it asks for sample standard deviation or population standard deviation. So for sample, you're going to use the number with SX. For population, it's sigma X. And then whenever there's an arrow there, that means you can arrow down and there's more data here. So if you're looking for median, that's right here. It's 19. In some of the future chapters, you're going to need Q1 and Q3. Those both show up here as well. So those are the ones that you'll be using from this one var stats function. You'll notice it does not give variance, and it does ask for variance in some of the problems. There isn't a way to get the TI-84 to calculate the variance, but you can get there easily from the standard deviation. So I just have the students write down the standard deviation because, unfortunately, as far as I can tell, there's not a way to grab that number from there, copy it or anything. And I have them go out to 4 decimal places, even though this is only asking for 2, because if you only go out to 2 and then you square it, you're going to end up with a rounding error. So like for this one, when it wants the sample variance, I would then have them write down 7.7653, and then they would type in 7.7653, and then use the x squared button and just get the variance that way. The one thing that kind of throws them off is that it asks for the variance first and they have to do the standard deviation first. And interestingly, so it looks like the so-called correct answer is 60.37, and I got 60.30 if I round it. But in my experience, if you go out to for standard deviations before you square it, you'll get an answer that the software will accept. So hopefully that works for you as well. There's one other type of problem, and it's really similar, but but it's grouped data. And so the process for this is a little bit different, and you have to use two of the lists. So this is where they've got data grouped. In this case, it's the number of articles and how long it took to review them. And I always tell people to notice on this one that these are always asking you for the approximate variance and the approximate standard deviation. And there's ones like this in 3.1 asking for the approximate mean and maybe median as well. I'm not sure. So you start out the same way with the stat edit and clear your lists. But now we need to have two lists here. We've got the time in months, except we're going to need to make that the midpoint of the time in months. And then the number of articles will become the frequency. So for L1, what we're going to do to get the midpoint is 0 plus 1. You take the starting point for the first and second one, divide that by 2. So that's going to be 0.5, and then 1.5. It always ends up following a pattern because the groups of times are in the same, in this case, 1 month range. So 2.5, 3, oops, 3.5, 3.5, 4.5, and 5.5. So that's the midpoint of this range. And then in L2, we're going to put the number of articles. So we've got 44, 16, 18, 20, 12, and 15. So the big difference here is when we go into stat calc, then we have to put in L2 as the frequency list. And L2 is right here. So we hit the second button and then number 2 to get L2 to show up there, and then calculate. And one thing to keep in mind is if you don't have anything in L2, but you still have the residual L2 in here from a previous one, you'll get an error. So be sure to point out to students to notice that, to only have L2 there if they're actually using it. And so again, it gives you the mean, the population standard deviation, and the sample standard deviation here. And this, it says consider the data to be a population, so that's how you know you're going to use the population. It always tells you whether you need sample or population. It's in there somewhere, so you don't actually need to know and understand what the difference is between a sample and a population, although that's obviously a good thing to know otherwise. And then it does give you the median if it asks for that. There aren't any quartile ones that are like that, so that's not ever going to come up. So that's it for everything that uses a calculator function in Chapter 3.